Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock sharp. So, Excellencies, distinguished guests, panelists, and everyone out there attending, welcome to this webinar on the situation in Belarus between threats and opportunities. It's hosted by the Polish and Lithuanian embassies in Stockholm. My name is Ola Westerberg. I'm the editor-in-chief of the online Foreign Affairs Journal at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. And just for transparency's sake, I'd like to say that I'm an independent journalist and no one is paying me for this except my regular employee. But I'm happy to join and be here. So I'd like to begin with giving the floor to Joanna Hoffman, the ambassador of the Republic of Poland.
Good morning. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the webinar, Belarus Between Threats and Opportunities, which was organized by two embassies, the Embassy of the Republic of Poland and the Embassy of the Republic of Lithuania in Stockholm, and in cooperation with the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. The webinar is with a special guest, Sviatlana Tsikhanowskaya. Welcome. Belarus is the neighboring country of Poland and Lithuania, and it is a country with a great historical heritage, a country which belongs to the big European family. That is why we Europeans have been particularly concerned about the course of events in Belarus since the presidential election results were announced. The EU Council made it clear that the election in Belarus were neither free nor fair, and called for the new presidential election to be held. In this context, we are also very concerned about the acts of repression and the incredible scale of brutality committed by the authoritarian government against thousands of Belarusian citizens who are peacefully demonstrating against the election fraud. As a result of the violence, many representatives of Belarusian civil society have been forced to leave their country. Many of them are currently living in Poland and Lithuania. Events in Belarus are still hard to predict, but it is already clear that this country will never be the same again. The ramifications of this movement will be felt throughout the region and will have the implications for the whole European Eastern neighborhood and the Baltic Sea region. I wish all panelists and participants of the webinar a very successful and interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I then turn to Vytis Jurkonis, the ambassador of the Republic of Lithuania.
Thank you. Good morning, dear friends and supporters of the Democratic Belarusian Society. Please allow me to express my gratitude for your active registration for today's discussion with our special guest, Sviatlana Tsikhanowskaya. We're glad, together with my Polish colleague, Joanna, and her dedicated staff, to provide you the platform for the inclusive discussions about the situation in Belarus and brainstorm about possible ways to support democracy fighters in Belarus. Belarusian people, under a repressive environment demanding for the democratic right to decide on their own future, need our urgent support, as well actions to stop Lukashenko's regime's war against its own people. Lithuania, together with Poland, as direct neighbors of Belarus, are one of the strongest supporters of Belarusian civil society. This support comes from our relatively recent history of democratic rebirth. Our independence and democratic freedoms were regained after peaceful revolution and support from the West. I remember that 3 decades ago, people in Stockholm every Monday took to the streets to support Baltic states' people demand for their independence from Soviet regime. And this support was really essential for our independence fight. Therefore, I hope that our countries will stand side by side with people of Belarus in their fight for democracy, and we will be witnesses of the establishment of the democratic Belarus in the nearest future. So I wish you all, dear friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very productive discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I now give the floor to the opening speakers, and we will first hear from Marcin Shidacz, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Poland.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for organizing such a important and timely discussion. My special gratitude goes to, of course, the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, but also to our both embassies in Stockholm. It is very important to discuss the current situation in Belarus among friends, not only Poland, Lithuania, neighboring country, but together with our Swedish friends, Swedish partner. We are the mother and father of the Eastern Partnership Program, so we need to cooperate very closely when it comes to our direct neighborhood. So I'm supposed to say a few words about the current situation in Belarus and the future developments of the situation. Poland, of course, has been following these developments in Belarus with a great interest. We've also supported the civil society on the ground, as well as those who fled their country out of fear or were just simply forced to leave. There are several oppositionists right now in Poland living in Warsaw who were just forced to cross the border. As we speak today, it is quite clear that Belarus will never be the same, but it's equally clear that we are not there yet. The goal of a democratic, stable, independent Belarus is still ahead of us, is still to be fought for. I do believe that decisive moment has come to all of us, to those who want change in Belarus, to those also who want to help. This is why it is important to discuss and to look for best options, having in mind that there are much more important speakers in a panel and experts with us today, including, of course, Madam Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya. I'll limit myself to only a few remarks on most important elements of the situation as we here in Poland see it now, here from Warsaw. First and crucial is, of course, the civil society, the greatest ever, most surprising awakening. The people of Belarus who raised their heads up and decided they want to live in a democratic state. And I don't think that there is anybody around Europe who fully expected that the Belarusian would stand massively for their rights. As we know, so far Belarusian people, they were perceived as the unfortunately the most Sovietized people among all the post-Soviet people. So it is a great surprise, but it's a positive information, of course. And this is, I would say, the asset that nobody can take away from Belarusians at this very moment. The second, of course, is the international community. For a long time, there hasn't been so much interest in Belarusian affairs all around Europe. It's a pity, I must admit it. We are neighboring countries, so we were directly interested in the developments of Belarus, but all around the world. In the more west you are in the European Union or the far from the eastern borders, maybe the less interest there was. So, and now it has changed. So with a long time peaceful protesters and unbelievable determination, Belarus managed to earn much more friends than just its direct neighbors, including Poland and Lithuania, Latvia. There is also a great interest not only in immediate help to protesters, but also in a comprehensive mid-term support for Belarusian civil society. Poland, but also other neighbors in Lithuania played a leading role in all EU's initiatives towards Belarus. Warsaw individually implemented a set of measures to help Belarusian opposition, as well as ordinary people fearing persecution. With in a form, we created a form of plan of solidarity with Belarus worth another 12 million euro only the last 4 months. And upon Polish initiative, the whole EU has agreed to work out the economic plan for the democratic Belarus, which would be, I believe, soon presented publicly by the European Commission. And of course, the new sanctions are being prepared due to Lukashenko's brutality. The last days and weeks, we all know what happened recently in Belarus, also that Mr. Bandarenka was killed by the security services in Minsk. And the third element of the situation I want to mention, especially in this debate, is the fact that the two incoming chairmanship of the OSCE would be Sweden and Poland. So, and we strongly believe that OSCE could and should have an important role to play in Belarus, and we are ready to work jointly to provide facilitation in a dialogue we all expect to take place at some point, the dialogue between the authorities in Minsk and the civil society, the opposition. And the last factor is of different nature, but it may be decisive in a midterm. There are signals from Russia, I would say. Of course, Russia is supporting Mr. Lukashenko. He is still in the office only because of the fact that Russia is supporting him. But as far as I understand, Russia is no longer interested in supporting him for free. So they are expecting Mr. Lukashenko to trade off elements of the sovereignty of this country in order to keep him in the office. But also in Russia, they are observing the current situation in Belarus among the ordinary people. The ordinary people in Belarus, they started to ask themselves, why do they were quite pro-Russian recently, I mean, for the last 30 years, because of also the propaganda, historical reasons. But they are starting to ask, why do we like Russia? Why do we support Mr. Putin if he is supporting Lukashenko, who is so brutal to us, who is using that kind of repression? So this anti-Russian sentiment, maybe not anti-Russian, but maybe not that much pro-Russian, is changing. So I do believe that the Kremlin is also analyzing this situation, that supporting Lukashenko is somehow losing the positive attitude of the Belarusian people. So that's on one hand. And briefly, several comments on the other hand. It is quite clear that there is a still long way to go and risk for us, and then they will definitely emerge as Belarus will follow the path towards the democratic future. There are three short elements I'd like to mention. The first is the current Lukashenko state of mind. He was first, of course, surprised by the resilience of Belarusian society, but recently he decided to intensify repressions. People are being arrested, the violence and brutality by the security forces are increasing. All this suggests that Mr. Lukashenko feels a bit, I would say, quite safe, and he believes that he's close to regain full control. Russian policy, I've already mentioned that there could be the change from the Russian position, not maybe in weeks to come, but in a month to come. I believe that they will understand that supporting Lukashenko is losing the Belarusian society. But of course, Russia's ultimate goal is to weaken Belarus, to alienate it, to create an impression that it can rely only on Russia to get deeper on the ground and acquire full control over the country, over its sovereignty and independence. And Russia is posing a serious threat to Belarusian integrity and independence. And that is a real threat we all need to have in mind. And the last factor is the situation in Europe. We know all the economic crisis is ahead of us. The pandemic is not over yet. So especially in some members, those countries and the Europe may soon feel inclinated on other issues maybe than Belarus. That could be a kind of fatigue among the European countries. So it is a reality we must face, and we need to keep the interest in the current situation in Belarus, not only right now, but also in the future. So just to sum up, whether one calls it challenges, threats, or just the reality, it is difficult to get through. So far, Belarusians have managed to make their own way, and I'm pretty convinced that they will manage, and Poland, as a neighbor, stands ready to assist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Undersecretary. I give the floor quickly to Vytis Jurkonis, the Lithuanian Deputy Foreign Minister. The floor is yours. And you need to unmute, sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. So thank you very much indeed for giving me the floor, and I would like to also congratulate all the participants of this important event, and to thank organizers. And obviously, it's first of all, congratulations, Svetlana, to you and your team, and everybody supporting you. Indeed, there is no turning point for Belarus, and obviously Belarus will not be ever, going backwards. So it's a complete change. And what Maciej was saying, indeed, every neighbor and more than that, further away, no matter whether it's west or southbound, should better know and realize it. Lithuania, we do have nearly 700 kilometers border with Belarus. We are close neighbors. There is quite a good contact, people-to-people contact, and even before this crisis. And Belarus has come to the limelight, I would say, of the international stage. And obviously, we should do all that we can. I mean, that countries, like-minded countries, helping Belarus democratic civil society, and changing their country into fully fledged, democracy. And that's why from the outside, so to say, Lithuania, we were doing our steps, passes, and work. I'm not here to kind of give an account on this. I guess we should concentrate on more on future. But the future is, I think, first of all, that we need to increase the pressure on the regime of Lukashenko, as we call it in Lithuania, de facto, authorities of Minsk. And the EU sanctions are important, and we have been doing a lot to kind of stimulate the attitude of our EU partners, and we are grateful to Poland, to Sweden, and other like-minded countries. But it's not yet, I think, enough. National sanctions are is good instrument, but if we really want to look for a kind of deeper result and quicker result of the European actions, including asset freezes and so on, that's what
bites, and that's what is important. So I hope that not only political but also economic, sanctions would go ahead. I know this is not the only, tool, but it is important, and so far, I guess we haven't been in full use of it. And obviously, we should also continue and expand every possible channel of the support to the Belarus, civil society. By this, I mean that there is a clear need to further support the Coordination Council's role as a central body for dialogue with de facto authorities. A sentence on this constitutional reform, when it is proposed by the de facto authorities, it means then, of course, it's just a trap. And I think only after changing, Lukashenko's regime, there might be, evolutionary or whatever process leading to important and deep democratic changes in the society, institution, legislation, and so on and so on. And I would just briefly mention that Lithuania, from this beginning of September, adopted a plan of support for the people of Belarus, including aid for victims of repression, treatment and rehabilitation, support for science and studies, civil society, and so on and so on. So this must be continued, and I'm glad that also the Belarus colleagues are much better organized now, and this assistance has, so to say, ways to go and reach those who need it. Let me single out, and here with thanks to our Swedish colleagues and partners, the European Humanities University, which is, I think, maybe even the most successful EU project for Belarus. And as you know, since 2006, it is functioning in Lithuania, in Vilnius. And to my understanding, soon it will be like 2,500 alumni, who so far were in most returning to Belarus, more than 60%, and they met quite a good demand in the labor market. So it is important.
Sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Jurkonis, we are a bit pressed for time,
Yes.
so could you please
Yes.
wrap it up soon? Thank you.
I understand. Yeah, I appreciate. I work my life by talking. But if seriously, my only point that I wanted to mention here now is about this Eastern Partnership. I know it's it seems like a little bit detached now from Belarus because of the events, but it is an important EU tool project, and when we think strategically about times to come, and by this I also mean massive support that will be needed for Belarus in times to come, when the situation allows, then it will be important. That's why we should do all we can, and I address to our EU partners, to keep it as a strategic, forward-looking project. And thank you, and sorry for being so long.
Thank you, Mr. Jurkonis. So I'd like to address all the attendees out there that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section, and we'll take some of your questions later on towards the end of this seminar. But I'd like now to give the floor, without further ado, to Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak in front of you today. And as the name of the event suggests, and is indeed in the case, our country is facing a great number of threats, but also great opportunities. Only we understand that with the support of international community, Belarusians can transform all the challenges into the historic opportunity to build a free and democratic country. Today, the social contract between the Belarusian state and citizen has been broken. And the state has become an obedient machine that follows the unlawful orders of self-proclaimed president. And Belarusians now live under constant threat of being prosecuted for their political convictions, for their refusal to accept the falsified election result, for their wish to exercise their civil and political rights. And numbers now speak for themselves. As of today, 143 people are recognized as political prisoners, and around 30,000 have been placed under administrative detention since August. To find a group in the Belarusian society, members of which have not gone the repressive state machine. Several prominent academics, among Associate Professor Natalia Dulina, lost their academic post because of the civil position. And systematic limitation of academics taken to the next level with criminal cases against politically active students, including my representative for youth affairs, Alana Gebremian, Maria Kalenik, Gleb Fitsny, and 5 other youth activists. And many have been threatened with expulsion should they continue defending their rights. Last week, Bishop Yuri Kasabutsky and the official representative of the Belarusian Orthodox Church, Sergei Lepin, received a warning from the investigation committee for the destructive character of the Facebook posts. But they only condemned the barbarian demolition by security forces of a memorial commemoration there repeatedly murdered by the riot police citizen Roman Bondarenko. As you know, journalists also have been detained. Katerina Borisevich from Tudbay, Katerina Andreeva and Daria Chultsova from Belsat, and more 6 journalists are facing such trumped-up criminal charges. Doctors were always under threat of being fired for expressing their opinion. But these days, the authorities have jailed the doctors who was brave enough to publish the medical record of the recently murdered Roman Bondarenko, disapproving the insinuations that he was intoxicated. Unfortunately, I could continue this list for a very long time, and it breaks my heart to think that instead of recognizing those courageous and talented people, the regime is destroying their lives. But we cannot let this happen. We need to hold free and fair elections as soon as possible, making sure that the will of the people is at long last respect. For this to happen, not a single person can remain behind the bars for their political position. All of them must be released and rehabilitated. I have to say that we are extremely grateful to Poland, Lithuania, and Sweden for your support. In my conversations with the leaders of your countries, I raised many issues on how we can work together going forward. And I have felt myself among friends Belarus. Poland and Lithuania were among the first countries to introduce the sanctions against the regime. Sweden has always been a true champion of human rights in Belarus. The humanitarian and diplomatic work of your country's missions in Belarus has been invaluable to Belarusian citizens, and your support within the European institutions has led to a strong coalition of countries within the Council. I truly hope that the next Foreign Affairs Council meeting will agree on the extended sanctions list, this time including natural and legal entities supporting Lukashenko's regime. Our team has compiled a list of 216 perpetrators supported by evidence and communicated it to the European leaders. Sweden will take over as OSCE chair on the 1st of January 2021, and I'm sure this chairmanship will be fruitful and provide a relevant follow-up to the Moscow Mechanism report. We cannot leave state terror and barbaric torture unpunished in the middle of Europe. Last 4 months were marked by extremely tragic moments for all the Belarusians. The whole nation went through one of the most traumatic experiences in the recent history, and we learned our lesson. Now we clearly understand that we do not want to be the second-class citizens in our home country. We want to restore the social contract and ensure that the rule of law and justice prevail. Belarusians should at long be heard and given a chance to make the country a true democracy. And only with your help and your support, we can turn the above-mentioned challenge into the opportunity for Belarus to come back where it truly belongs, a family of European democratic countries. Thanks for your attention, and I'm so sorry, 11:30 I have the next meeting, but I leave Franak Viacorka with you, please. And Vytis Jurkonis also. Thank you for attention, and see you.
Thank you. I think it was interesting to hear Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya's account on the risks that the protesters are facing, killings and arrests, harassment. They take a big risk, obviously. And my question is, or one of the questions is, how can you keep that movement going? How can the Coordination Council continue to tap into this energy from the opposition, and they will expect results at some point. Franak Viacorka, would you like to address that, please?
Sure. Good afternoon. Just to introduce, I work as a Svetlana foreign policy advisor. So basically, we don't have other choice than to continue putting pressure on Lukashenko. So basically, the first steps were to delegitimize the regime and legitimize the people's protest, which was done successfully. And right now, we see how the regime is slowly collapsing. So basically, the system is cracked. What we have to do, we have to make another hit. So this regime, which is vertically built and built in order to help to protect Lukashenko himself, in order to make it rotting and falling down. Coordination Council goal in the very beginning was to represent people's interest on one hand, but also to serve the platform for dialogue, for negotiations. This is why first it was about 50 people, then became 500. Now it's more than 10,000 people in the Coordination Council, and they represent all the social demographic groups. Unfortunately, Lukashenko arrested the presidium of Coordination Council. So right now, 3 are in exile. The others are in jail. Svetlana Alexievich is in Germany on treatment, Olga Kovalkova and Pavel Latushka in Poland. Others like Maria Kolesnikova behind bars. So Coordination Council is half paralyzed in terms as the political body, but it still conducts multiple very useful and important campaigns on organizing people. So initially it should serve as the proto-parliament, representing different people and different interests. But now it serves as the body of that coordinate multiple thousands of initiatives that emerged recently during the uprising. And Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, she is more like executive body, executive institution, and collaboration. Coordination Council as representative body, Svetlana as the executive body, they create this new civil society and the prototype of the future Belarusian state. When Lukashenko state is collapsing, Coordination Council with Svetlana and her team takes the lead on transiting Belarus to the new elections and democratic transformation.
Thank you. Obviously, the Lukashenko regime is not participating in this session, so we can't hear their point of view. But I would like to ask Martin Kragh if you could enter the soul of Alexander Lukashenko or Vladimir Putin and try to explain to us what are they aiming for at the moment and hoping for.
Well, Lukashenko's main goal is regime stability, which he identifies to a large extent with himself. He has come to identify his own role as the president or a dictator of Belarus as vital to the survival of Belarus. And for Russia, or from the perspective of Russian leaders, Belarus, of course, has an important role, not just in the historical imagination of sort of the traditional Russian sphere of interest or empire, but also in terms of security policy, the vision of Belarus as an important territory. And Russia maintains a lot of sort of levers of influence. The two countries are independent, but they have a lot of mutual cooperation going back to the 1990s in the spheres of economy and the military and security cooperation. And we can expect that what the Russian leadership is currently thinking about is how to manage a transition sometime in the future. It's not certain that Lukashenko is in for the very long term, but it's also difficult to imagine who will replace him at the current moment, because the longer he remains in power, the less popular also Russia will become in the minds of many people in Belarus. The majority of people in Belarus have a favorable opinion of Russia, but it's changing. It's becoming a little more negative since the election, when Putin so strongly supported Lukashenko. And so this means that for Russia to maintain its ties to the people of Belarus in the future, they need to imagine sometime a post-Lukashenko environment. And this is difficult because the democratic election, which is now required by the civil society in Belarus, is a high risk for the Kremlin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to move on to the question of sanctions. We heard, we know that Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya is obviously a supporter of sanctions from the EU and the international community. But sanctions are a tricky business. Sometimes they work, sometimes they seem to reinforce positions. Maybe this is a question for Vytis Jurkonis or Kamil Kwiecinski. I don't know which one of you would like to pick up that thread.
Okay, so maybe I will answer first. And thank you very much for the invitation. Sanctions indeed are a very tricky instrument. I agree, especially economic sanctions, because visa ban is something obvious. It was first step. Personal sanctions against the highest level of and middle level of representatives of a regime, Belarusian regime, people who were involved into crackdown repressions. It was obvious. This is first reaction, but of course it doesn't work quickly. It's not very strong instrument in something. This is harmful for the image, for the comfort maybe of traveling. Now maybe it's not very up to date because of COVID-19. Maybe in the future, economic sanctions are much more complicated issue. I'm not a fan of. I'm not a supporter of full economic sanctions or comprehensive economic sanctions, or even sectoral economic sanctions. For example, sanctions against Belarusian oil refineries, which are really dependent on export of oil products, also to European markets, to Dutch market, to British market, also to Ukraine market. If Ukraine would join, which is not excluded in current circumstances, to this kind of sanctions. But I am not in favor of this kind of sanctions because it will hit mostly to Belarusian citizens. common citizens, workers of that enterprises. Belarus now, even without this kind of sanctions, is in crisis, in recession, and this year will be also ended by a decline of GDP, not of growth, even small, of GDP of Belarusian GDP. And we also should remember that majority of workers from that enterprises, also all refineries, are at least skeptical about the regime. Part of them, not very big groups, but still were trying to organize some strikes in several, at least part of them, part of enterprises. But last but not least, I think that there is use to impose very precise sanctions which will hit several enterprises personally connected to Lukashenko and to his people. We know that enterprises, we can define, identify them. It's not so difficult. So I think that it could be very reasonable step how to hit Lukashenko, but not to hit common citizens.
Thank you.
Can I jump in here? Can I jump in here, please?
Sure.
I think that's absolutely the wrong perception, which doesn't have anything in common with reality. And please, let's understand that we have humanitarian crisis in Belarus, evoked by dictatorial regime of Lukashenko, who creates the military junta style management of the state. The state created by Lukashenko to serve his own interest, and all state companies, almost all of them, including the police, law enforcement, KGB, and 6 other law enforcement agencies, including state enterprises, Belarus, Kali, Masam, Zakate, they are working for the repressive regime. All the workers who were initiated the strike were fired. Their families are threatened right now. They take out kids of striking workers, of those repressed who are in jail right now. They're taking kids from families. You know, we are with terror organizations, Lukashenko. And when you speak about like ordinary people, you know, people are suffering right now and they're trying to survive. And the sanctions is the only way to stop the terror. And if we speak about like, let's not sanction because it will hit ordinary people, people are already hit. You know, there are 13 people, 13 deaths, 8 of them are confirmed as them evoked by law enforcement, by Siloviki somehow. You know, and these numbers of victims will be growing. And if we feel that sanction is the way to stop it, and all the signals we are receiving from the state authorities that only sanctions is the only thing they're really afraid of, we should do and we should promote this idea. It works as the deterrent instrument. And this, you know, propaganda thing, you know, that sanctions will hit ordinary people. Yes, it will hit, but it will help to stop the problem, you know, to solve the Belarusian crisis, but not to close the issue. I know that Western countries always, they think about the Belarus issue because it's comfortable, but we should solve the problem once and forever. In 2011, when these vegetarian sanctions were imposed, which were like against a few companies, Lukashenko's pockets, businessmen, easily rebuilt the operations and move assets to other companies, and it will allow them to survive. The support of Russia and disappointment in Europe is connected with absolutely inconsistent policy of Europe towards Belarus. You know, these numbers of pro-Russian support is connected that Europe for many years enabled Lukashenko's regime. For many years, Europe financed Lukashenko's regime. Last year, Chancellor Kurz, leadership of Latvia, leadership of Poland, coming to Lukashenko, building businesses with him, giving him money. You know, and now we should make work on our mistakes that we provide. We were thinking that Lukashenko can be re-educated. And if we will not take action right now, if Europe will not take action, there will be huge disappointment, and that will be betrayal to Belarus people. European state must take responsibility for Belarus. If not Europe, then no one else. This is the moment.
Right. Mr. Kwashinsky, do you wish to a quick response to that?
Yes, very quick response. I will stand on my position despite arguments called by Mr. Viacorka. From his statement, I could understand that Belarusians are ready to revolution, to hard revolution which will change everything over one night in Belarus. I don't have this kind of impression. Belarusians are not ready to fight with militia, to shoot to militia, to attack public buildings. Developments even in August haven't shown this readiness of Belarusians. We shouldn't accelerate it in an artificial way. Belarusians, according to their mentality, and they have right to that, they are ready for a long way to the victory, a long internal crisis and long resistance to Lukashenko, not a revolution which will change everything over one night. Thank you very much.
Can I also jump in just to answer one thing? Briefly?
Sorry, just very quickly, please, in that
Yes,
case.
just because Mr. Viacorka just mentioned the previous contacts of Polish diplomatic services and politicians with Mr. Lukashenko. Let me just stress that before that revolution, before that fact, we know, of course, who Mr. Lukashenko was and what kind of regime we were doing or working with. But he was elected by the Belarusian people, and he had a popular support in the previous years. And just to remind you that Belarus is our neighboring country, and we do have to have some kind of contacts with our neighbors, whoever you as Belarusian were voting for. That's why in previous years we've been trying to have a dialogue with authorities, with Minsk. Everything has changed when the election were rigged and when the repression started. That's why we've changed our attitude, and we've been trying to support the civil society parallelly. Even in the time of dialogue with Mr. Lukashenko, you as the Belarusian society, the free media, civil society could get the financial support, political support from us. I would say that was a good direction and a good job we've done. And I'm a bit surprised that we've been somehow accused that we dare to have any contact with the legal authorities of Belarus. That's the diplomacy, and I think that's the way it should be done. Thank you.
Thank you. We could easily have a full seminar just on this topic. But we tried to cover a few of them. So I suggest we move on, even though this is a very interesting discussion for sure. We have a big international new player on the scene, President-elect Joe Biden. Does that change the equation in any way in Belarus? And I'm putting this question to, how about Vytis Jurkonis? Are you tempted to pick that subject up?
Yeah, I might. Thank you. Well, it pains me actually to be at the discussion, though. Thank you for the invite, because I can only, especially hearing the last remarks, I imagine, like Maria Kolesnikova or Igor Losy or any of the political prisoners in Belarus sitting and listening to that discussion. And, really, the situation, whether like with Joe Biden, Mr. Biegun was the one who was among the first who met with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. I think it was in late August. So, even with the current administration, there were contacts, and I think that, the US was among the ones who initiated the OSCE Moscow mechanism, the ones which imposed sanctions. So generally, I wouldn't say that this current administration was not active on Belarus, and certainly we might expect a change in the rhetoric, perhaps focusing even more on democracy and human rights. But I don't think that it fundamentally changes the picture. I think I am a strong believer in the US institutions, in the foreign office, and I think that this commitment to democracy and human rights was there, despite all the tweets, despite all the rhetoric of the President Trump. So I think that the US is going to be on track despite all the turbulences what they have inside the country and what is happening in the other parts of the world. But let me touch upon another item is that, when we are discussing this, like, what will the US do? What will the fundamental question is, what are we as Europeans, as Lithuanians, as Poles, as Swedes are doing? In the, we can discuss coordination council, and the opposition, asking ourselves, it's all right, but it's a rather narrow approach regarding the depths of the processes which are happening in Belarus. This is the mistake also regarding the Belarusian authorities were making. They try to paralyze the presidium by putting them into jails, like to push Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and the rest out of the country, expecting that the protests will stop, and it didn't, and it will not. They will take different forms, but they will continue, and we are seeing that, and we have seen different forms of that already during the last weekend. I'm not really sure what Kamil is expecting. I remember all these analysts and experts of Belarus saying the protests wouldn't last a week, and they did, because and they will. And I think that while we are discussing, so I wonder whether it will last for another month or 10, or how it will evolve. It's more the question to us, before raising questions about the unity coordination, let me remind you how the unity policy worked out previously. Remember Milinkevich in 2006? Other efforts which failed completely. We have neither time nor luxury to debate unity. In fact, democracy is about diversity and horizontal ties, which are happening right now in Belarus. The conversation between different stakeholders is there, coordination efforts are there, but why distract ourselves with that? Do we really want to discuss the future political visions while Belarusian people are out there in the streets? And even worse, in jails? Why wouldn't we check how our dialogue with the authorities were going and are going instead? We know what needs to be done: free and fair elections, period. This is what the Belarusian people are demanding, so let's not distract ourselves. We might be organizing talking clubs, resolutions, organize events, even establish new institutions, but isn't that working for those who are trying to delay time? Also, the idea of the government in exile, this is weakness. This is signaling our inability to stick to one demand only: free and fair elections. Everyone here knows what needs to be done: free and fair elections, release of political prisoners, stop the violence, sanctions, big time, support to civil society, and commitment to the future reforms of Belarus. That should be the blueprint, and let's not invite the bicycle or new institutions. Let's put the pressure to these particular items at all possible international forums and at all times. No need to be original here, provide new ideas. This is what needs to be done, and anything else is just delaying time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jurkonis. Mr. Kozinski, you were mentioned there in the comment. Would you like to reply quickly?
I was mentioned. I am expert. I am not a political activist. I am not human rights defender, not a member of Belarusian opposition. So I only give here expert assessment. My expert assessment was, as I said, that Belarusians, because this is also atypical for their mentality, it's not accusation, it's only assessment. Belarusians are not ready for radical revolution. This is fact. Another fact, Lukashenko lost his credibility, I would say completely, because he was losing his credibility step by step in previous year. After each presidential elections, maybe one exception was in 2015 when it was quite soft in Belarusian terms, but it was in context of conflict in Ukraine, annexation of Crimea and Donbas, so it was completely different situation. But now, after that 9th of August, in my opinion, Lukashenko lost his credibility completely. This is the end of his credibility. And what is the more interesting? This is not the end of his credibility in the West. I hope that all member states of European Union think like that. I'm not so sure, because I don't have this kind of insight in each capital of European Union, but in my assessment is that. But what is the more interesting, Lukashenko lost his credibility also in Moscow. But of course, Russia is not interested to accept opinion, all those statements, demands, which are coming from the street. Under no circumstances they are not able to accept a revolution or peaceful demonstrations in Minsk and the regime change under pressure of the street. That's why they support still Lukashenko, but they are also interested in transition of power in Belarus. And there is, in fact, maybe we can argue with that, we cannot, but I think it's fact that Russia is only one effective trigger which could influence a situation in Belarus, so far at least. I mean, regime change in Belarus. We should expect that they will make more pressure on Lukashenko, even more than now, to push him towards constitutional reform. And final result of that should be, looking from their statements and reading between lines, to organize elections. And in this kind of elections, very big chance for victory has, in my opinion, of course, a pro-Russian candidate, which will be promoted by Russia. And of course, we can say at this stage that everything is done, we lost. No. In this point, I can agree with Vytis that we should be focused on support for civil society in Belarus, for opposition, for all those victims of crimes, of repressions. We should build stronger and more developed civil society. And in case of electoral victory of a pro-Russian candidate in future elections, maybe next year, maybe in 2 years, who knows? This is a very difficult issue to give a precise forecast. This candidate should also respect civil society, should respect the opinion of the Belarusian street. And if we will support them more as a European Union, this is also answer for question of Vytis, what we can do. We support more them. We could be better organized. This opinion, this street factor, I will finish. This street factor in Belarus will be more influential and more important for each new candidate, for each new president of Belarus.
Thank you, Mr. Viacorka. A pro-Russian candidate would do well thanks to support from Moscow. What do you say about that?
So far, Russia doesn't have anyone more pro-Russian than Lukashenko, and this is the reason why they invest so much and risk with their reputation and support in Belarus. They really were not prepared for this changes, for this uprising in Belarus, and now they have to urgently create structures, organizations, build political leaders that will be representing Russian, let's say, Russian interest. So far, there are no such figures. Some people mention Mazin from Ural-Kali. Some people mention other Russia-connected somehow politicians. But it seems that they didn't manage to find or to grow anyone in addition or in substitution of Lukashenko. Russia and Lukashenko has one common goal: to not let uprising win, because Russia doesn't want to create the precedent. Lukashenko doesn't want to lose power, and both of them are discussing the scenario. Russia wants its own scenario to be in game when it will remain in control of the political and economic situation. Lukashenko wants the scenario allow him to stay in power or the face. And the visit Lavrov, I guess tomorrow, right? It must reveal, some peculiarities, some details about these expectations of Russia. Perhaps we will hear a new scenario. This constitution reform, which is very dangerous and very non-timely for us and the uprising, this is also the way to confuse and to change the focus from the real goal, new and fair elections, to the discussions on the long-term transformation, which will be plausible both for Lukashenko and for Russia. So we shouldn't allow these discussions to confuse constitutional reform, that's the second, perhaps even the third issue. First of all, this is about new and fair elections, and we have to stick with this and have to repeat. This is the goal. We stick this very beginning. We want people being heard. We have coordination council as a representative of the Russian people. This is what have to be reminded all the time. And I sincerely ask the Western democracies, to not fall in this trap, to not be confused, but to stick with everything. I know that it sounds pathetic, that, everyone is bored to repeat the same, but this is who win. Peaceful protest that must lead to release political prisoners, to stop the violence and conduct new and free and fair elections. No change in strategy. And yes, I agree with Mr. Kamil that there is no possibility of resistance, armed resistance, and Belarusians are not such nation that will resist with arms, and Belarusians are powerful with their non-violent discipline. Of make this non-violent resistance going, because this is the way of peaceful support of the protest, without making it more violent and aggressive. This is the way to change and transform Belarus society and to solve this problem.
Thank you. Martin Kragh, what do you think about Sweden's role in this, especially considering that the Swedish government is about to become the chairman of the OSCE? It was mentioned by Svetlana, and so I thought we'd pick up that thread a bit. Can the OSCE actually do anything, or is it just a talk shop?
Well, that remains to be seen, but we can be sure that Belarus will be on the agenda. I mean, my impression is that when the planning was initiated, perhaps in May, June, July, for the Swedish chairmanship, Ukraine was perhaps on the top of the agenda because of the ongoing violent conflict with Russia. But it turns out now that, of course, Belarus will need to be equally on the top of the minds of Swedish diplomats. The point here is, of course, that we need to reinforce the pressure for democratic elections using all available tools, and recognize that what is happening now in Belarus is a political revolution and of a kind we haven't seen in Europe since 1989-91. And make the and listen to the people of Belarus who have spoken, because it's not just a minority of people of Belarus who are now out protesting. It's an incredible manifestation of the whole broad political movement, which has its roots in all spheres of the Belarusian society. I'll stop there.
Thank you. We will, in a minute or two, we'll start taking questions from the audience. Does anyone else want to add anything on that last topic?
Well, in fact, I think that Sweden's role is crucial, and their upcoming presidency at the OSCE is of utmost importance. And I think that there are a lot of expectations within the EU, but also within the Belarusian society. Sweden has been a role model in a way for how Belarus, might look like, combining this welfare state, but mostly regarding the human rights agenda, and different aspects of that, gender, issues as well, including environment and all of that. So in a way, this upcoming presidency is going to be a very difficult, hard, challenging litmus paper for Sweden to show whether they are truly standing for human rights. And given that when we speak about free and fair elections, one of the few, if not the only bodies for free and fair elections is the ODIHR, So it's basically going to be the very hard task whether during the Swedish presidency, the free and fair elections in Belarus are going to happen in February, in March. I'm not sure, but I think that should be ambition and the goal, because if we adhere to what Kremlin was signaling to us, basically that this free and fair elections, in their understanding, might be happening in 2022. It clearly shows where Kremlin is standing. They are not sure. They are not controlling, the opposition or other candidates. They are trying to set up this scene and buy the time to actually manipulate the upcoming. They understand that given the energy which is out there, like in the streets in the Belarusian society, they cannot really predict and program the final outcome. I agree here with the Camille in terms of that whoever who comes next after Lukashenko, and that's inevitable. There's going to be a next after Lukashenko. He or she is going to be highly dependent on Kremlin energy, economy, information culture, and all the other dimensions wise. So I don't understand why Kremlin is actually panicking, but they have the mentality to control everything, and to stage the elections. So thus, I think that free and democratic world, and I see Sweden as the role model of that. If we are interested to actually not play the Russian card, the Kremlin's card, is actually announce and push the Belarusian authorities to make sure that the free and fair elections are happening during the presidency of Sweden at the OSCE, and that's actually also in the interest not only of the Belarusian people, but also Belarusian authorities, because any other alternative is going to be fake and mostly driven by Kremlin scenario. So if the efforts previous, like a year ago and 2 years ago, of those who were claiming that they are in favor of sovereignty, independence of Belarus, so all this geopolitical vocabulary. So it's in our interest, and that should be our aim, to make sure that these free and fair elections are happening sooner rather than later, before Kremlin sends up the scene and before this energy in the society is not drying out.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add to that? Or should we move on with some questions from the audience? I can see that there is some skepticism as to what the OSCE chair can actually achieve. It doesn't have much muscle, it is argued. It will be as constructive as its Yemen peace talks, is one pretty dry comment. Franak Viacorka, what do you think about the OSCE's OSCE's possibility?
OSCE's role. Personally, I don't see our possibility or other platform, other organization that can solve and help and solve the crisis in Belarus. Belarus is the member of UN and OSCE, and basically these are two platforms that can be considered as solution builders. So on OSCE, we have already huge success. We had some contacts with Lukashenko's people through Parliamentary Assembly. We have passed some messages through other OSCE bodies. We have fantastic recommendations built and created by ODI chair of OSCE as well, which we will be using for potential negotiations on new elections. So basically OSCE already helped a lot. But it will play a crucial role after the moment when dialogue starts. And there is no better place. And it will depend on all of us and all OSCE members and all its OSCE ministers how efficient the role of OSCE will be in order to not repeat mistakes. And I think all of us learned from mistakes in other countries, in other crises, and Belarus is definitely a very unique case, which didn't have similar precedents before. And I think OSCE can build a huge play a huge role, that will bring finally, to this new and free and fair elections. Regarding Sweden and what Vytis mentioned, I think we are lucky, to have Sweden's presidency in OSCE, in particular because of the perception of Sweden. Sweden is perceived as neutral for Belarus. Sweden is always a champion in human rights democracy. It means that Sweden will always put on the agenda the Belarus case and stopping violence as the precondition of this for any other talks. And also in terms of involving, let's say, not so involved actors from post-Soviet space, I think here Sweden can also play a huge role. And I don't think we will have consensus in the permanent Council of OSCE, at least not yet. But I'm sure that even discussions in the permanent Council of Belarus will be happening much more often, which is very important. And let's remember that perhaps OSCE, the only contact we have now, Lukashenko's authorities, and perhaps they unwillingly. They do communicate through OSCE.
If I would like to add something from the one
yes,
hand,
please.
Of course, I can agree that Swedish term leadership will be very useful because Sweden, as far as I understand, always has and had a very rational approach to Russia, to Russian interest in the region, to Russian policy on post-Soviet area. There were no illusions from Stockholm about that. Sweden also has a high culture of neutrality, of democracy and human rights. But even if you look at this positive example of Swedish diplomacy or mediation, which could be implemented there, we should understand that, of course, this is only my opinion, that Lukashenko is not able and won't be able to take part in any dialogue with opposition, with real opposition. I don't mean Mr. Vaskresiński, who is another not very professional operation of Belarusian KGB. I mean real opposition, and also Lukashenko is not ready to have a dialogue with the West about internal situation in Belarus, even if Sweden will propose something, not Poland or Lithuania, because of course we understand that Vilnius and Warsaw are main enemies now for Lukashenko. We are trying to invade. Of course, this is only his narrative: invade Belarus. So. I can see space for dialogue only after free and fair elections with new president of Belarus. Even pro-Russian Belarus, I think, will be more able to have a dialogue, will understand necessity of dialogue better than Lukashenko now.
How can contacts between the parties here actually be facilitated? What would you suggest, Martin? Do you have an idea on that? Because they're not talking, obviously, to each other.
Well, I mean, at the moment, Lukashenko is terrorizing his own population, and there's very little sort of space where any agreement or dialogue can be reasonable. But of course, you need to maintain diplomatic channels and diplomatic contacts. That's one thing. The main thing now is to think in the long term. What sort of country do we want Belarus to be in the future? And this has already now been articulated for us by the people in Minsk, in the streets and across the country. But of course, what we can do is to facilitate that is creating opportunities for citizens of Belarus to visit the EU, to be part of the EU in different ways. It could be student exchanges, it can be people-to-people relations. There are a lot of things in ways where you can support civil society contacts. And in fact, it's my guess that the work that was already done in the last decade or more in this sphere has contributed a lot to young people in Belarus who were able to visit countries in the EU and come back to their home country. So there are, of course, many things you can do politically and diplomatically, but I think the long-term work has to also involve these other domains.
One question from the audience. Not sure who is best suited to answer, but Jack asks, can we expect any spillover effects of the protests in Central Asia? Is there a potential for a CIS version of the Arab Spring? Vytis Jurkonis, would you like to take that?
Well, we've seen things in Central Asia, already before. So I think the question is like interesting, but that goes like a little bit outside the topic we are discussing. The focus is Belarus. The important aspect of that is, of course, perhaps mentioning why Kremlin is so hesitant, to push for free and fair elections, because they are afraid of this perception that Belarusian people do win. And that would be a terrifying signal, in their opinion, for the Russian civil society and the Russian people. If Belarusians could peacefully, achieve free and fair elections, so why wouldn't we? So that's why Putin is so not willing to see that change and the elections happen sooner rather than later, though he has options to manipulate given his propaganda tools and all of that. So this spillover is more like a question, is more relevant when we talk about and analyze the steps by the Kremlin. But again, it only goes back to us, and the question is not what Belarusian people are going to do or what the other countries are going to do, but it's more a question what we can control. What are we going to do? And what Martin said, it's fine, all these exchanges and all of that. We've been doing that for years. I remember in 2010 when we, early 2011, when we were organizing a conference for the international implementers and the states, regarding solidarity actions, the easiest solution was to actually provide money to the civil society, and where we are. And yes, that part of that investment, is out there, there are people like Franak Viacorka, who were part of the exchanges, and, there are many of them. So that long-term perspective was there, is there, and should be there. It's not an either-or question, but the question of our political will is really of utmost important here, because Belarusian civil society is signaling the change now for 3 months, and the question is, if we are going to be hiding behind this, collective body of the EU that, EU can only be concerned, no, let's not play that. Behind the EU, there's national countries, Lithuania, Poland, Sweden, Germany, UK, and then certain politicians like presidents, ministers, deputy ministers, who are sitting here, their championship and their leadership in terms of whether we are standing for values and principles or not. And this is not interference into domestic affairs. And, I don't take the argument that Camille was saying that, let's not hurt the Belarusian people, because Belarusian people are basically hurting themselves by going on strikes. They are sacrificing. And, if we are not able to actually say that, well, okay, the OECD, Europe is about values and principles, about free elections, about human rights, about democracy, and we should be standing for it, it's OEC and all these international bodies consists of states. Thus, leadership of the capitals, leadership of certain politicians is so important, and let's not hide behind the collective bodies of OEC, of EU, showing our indecisiveness. Let's be champions of the cause, and then OEC and the EU would be effective, you know, and the OEC,
I think we need to, sorry.
And the OEC Moscow
mechanism,
and the OEC Moscow mechanism shows this leadership and commitment. 17 countries signed up for that, so it might be effective. So let's not distract ourselves about this hiding behind these collective bodies, because it's about us.
Thank you. We have another question here. I thought I would ask Kamil Kwashinsky if he wants to take it. At what point does Putin tell Lukashenko to give up and say that, you know, I'm abandoning you?
I think that Putin understood, as I said, so maybe I will develop my idea. Putin understood that Lukashenko lost his credibility in his eyes just after the 9th of August. This ridiculous, also from expert point of view, swift between accusations against Moscow just before the 9th of August from Lukashenko's side, and accusations towards the West was completely unacceptable, ununderstandable from a rational point of view, and was completely out of sense from point of view of diplomacy, of rational international affairs, that everyone understood that Lukashenko is at the end of his possibilities, of his political career. I would like to remind you that just 2 or 3 days before elections, the main center who was leading Belarusian opposition was in Moscow, in Lukashenko's opinion. And just after the 9th of August, the main leading center for Belarusian opposition was in Warsaw, Vilnius, Washington, and other Western countries. I think everyone understood that Lukashenko is going down as a political leader, that he is only desperate dictator who is trying to keep his power to the end, nothing more. He lost his intuition, his possibility, all his skills for which he was famous for within many years, and Putin could told him to give up. I think during first day conversation, phone conversation, first weekend after the 9th of August. But as I said, for Russia, this is very dangerous time. They are not able to accept street criteria, a criteria of revolution, of demonstrations. They are not interested in precedent that they accept regime change under pressure of the street. They should wait, looking from their interest. They should give a package of constitutional reform, of internal dialogue in Belarus, and after that, new elections. They have, I think that they elaborated more or less some plan how to do that. How it will be effective and what Lukashenko is for that. This is very, very open question. And I think that next year will be very interesting from this point of view.
Thank you. So we're close to wrapping the whole webinar up. Franak Viacorka, anything you want to add, concluding remarks?
Sure. Again, thanks so much for supporting us, and definitely we have to focus on the positive agenda and what we positively offer to Belarus. Definitely we have to think about a moment right now, because this is what Belarusians expect from us. I definitely believe that the protest movement is not fading out, as some people believe, but it's growing and it's changing forms. After last weekend, we had huge push towards self-organization in Minsk and regions. We, in combination with outside pressure, this protest will be growing. Lukashenko will be making more and more mistakes. his statements, his actions recently do not have any consistency. And this means that he don't have clear strategy. So this means that we need more clear strategy, clear both to Belarusians but also to outside actors. But we shouldn't make mistake and switch our discussion towards reforms, future position of Belarus, which bloc Belarus should belong, because it divides people. The power of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and the whole movement right now is that it does not have a clear political program, except democratic changes and fair elections, which is shared by all Belarusians. And these free and fair elections, again, that must be written by big letters everywhere. And this is something that we all are facing towards, and Belarusians really expect all countries around the world, and the Western democracies in particular, to help right now, both with punishing Lukashenko's henchmen and bringing them to justice, supporting Belarus media, civil society, volunteers, all those who are suffering, and isolating Lukashenko. These are three main directions that we can discuss further. Again, thanks to organizers, and again thanks for the support you all, Sweden, Lithuania, Poland, are doing for us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Martin, Kragh, end notes. Would you like to add something? What should we look for now?
We should look for the next step, but we know what that step is. It's the European support for the democratic revolution ongoing in Belarus. And I think the impressions we were given here by the representatives of the opposition, but also other panelists, I think they have given us a way forward. So that would be my final word.
Vytis Jurkonis?
Yes, thank you. Well, Europeans and countries represented here did the first step by not recognizing Alexander Lukashenko as the president. Well, then the next step, like, it leaves us in the vacuum. We need a second step. It's either recognizing Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as president-elect, and I don't think she wants that. I don't think that anyone, like most of the countries, want that, because that would not be true. Not true, but we cannot clearly show that or prove that, despite all the protests happening. Thus, we need a second step, which is free and fair elections. So once we did that first step, the second step needs to be taken. And let's not mirror Kremlin. Let's not pretend we are playing geopolitics, because this is not what we are, who we are. Europe is about values, principles, democracy, fundamental freedoms. And I think that let's give a right Belarusian people to choose their future through the free and fair elections, and then the rest will follow. The amendments to the constitution, the reforms, like Europe or Russia or a neutral country. But before we discuss that, Belarusian people need the right to choose, and that is only going to be implemented through the free and fair elections. And I hope, and I believe, Swedish presidency at the OSCE is perhaps the most capable to achieve that.
If I may, I would like to support Vytis.
Yes, please. 1 minute.
Okay, we should avoid. I will manage. We should avoid impression that we would like to make a deal with Russia about Belarus. Under no circumstances, this is completely far from Polish way of thinking about this region. Belarus is an independent country. Of course, me as an expert, I have to take into my consideration influence of Russia, but it doesn't mean that Poland is going to make any deal with Russia about Belarus. Main direction, main area is, as Vytis said, to support civil society and to go towards fair and free elections, when Belarusian people will be main force or only one force which will decide about future of their country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, our time is actually up. Thank you very much, everyone, for all of your very interesting input and different aspects of this situation in Belarus. And I wish everyone the best, our panelists, ambassadors, ministers, and also, of course, you, all of you watching from home or well, likely at home nowadays, or your offices. All the best. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.